right, ready?
Fantastic.
Yeah. All right, great.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm here with Dr. Sims, WVU, Director of Jazz. And I'm Matt Hill, the Executive Director of Dream Big Music. And I want to thank you, Jared, or Dr. Sims, for spending time with us today and doing this interview. It's really going to mean a lot to the kids in the Ohio Valley.
Well, it's a pleasure because, I'm stuck here in Morgantown and it's a big state. It's a really big state.
Yeah.
There's a lot of land and a lot of space. And so it's really important to me that I can reach out to people that aren't in the vicinity here of these couple of counties. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Oh, we appreciate you. Well, we have some questions here from Dream Big Music and parents of kids that are the participants in our program, and some from the kids themselves. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Could you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, sure. And stop me if you can't hear me well enough. I'm still getting used to my audio setup. But in short, I grew up in a town called Stanton, which is just over the hill in Western Virginia, Western Virginia, like East Virginia.
Yeah.
My first instrument was the piano, and it just happened because we happened to have a piano in the house. So I took a lot of classical piano lessons. By the time I got in the 5th grade, I started playing saxophone, and my mom actually chose it. I'd never seen a saxophone in my life. I mean, I literally had no idea what it was. It came in the mail. They ordered it from Indiana. It came in the mail. My band teacher was really, really outstanding. He ended up teaching at James Madison for a while, and now I've kind of lost track of him. But he gave me a really good start on the saxophone. So then the clarinet and flute came after that, because saxophone players often double on clarinet and flute. There's a lot of similarities. I ended up doing my undergrad degree at West Virginia University, and I applied to a bunch of schools, North Carolina, a bunch in Virginia and West Virginia. And I came to West Virginia, frankly, because it's comprehensive, and the saxophone teacher at that time was really, really amazing. It was a really good program. I liked everything about it, and admittedly, they give me some funding too, which was really helpful.
Yeah.
And so I actually studied jazz, but a whole lot of classical music as well here. Had a really amazing teacher. And then I went straight to Boston to New England Conservatory, and I was there for a long time in Boston. I studied, all three of my degrees are all different things. Mm-hmm. So that's something I want to instill in the students. It's really important to have an open mind, even though you might have a passion for something, whether that be whatever, hip hop or Latin music or whatever. It's really, really helpful to have a really wide scope of things. So my master's degree was in third stream, which is basically like a hybrid of jazz and classical music. And then I toured in a band for a long time, actually a couple of different bands nationally. Got to drive around the country a whole lot. And then I got into teaching, and I taught at a bunch of colleges, taught at a bunch of community music schools, had some really great students. And then I did the DMA, which is the doctoral program, kind of a little later on in life, after I already taught a bunch. And that was actually in straight up classical music. It was kind of a secret that I even played jazz. That was at Boston University. And the big reason I did it is because it was fully funded, 100% funded. All I had to do was play in the wind ensemble. So somewhere there's some recordings of me playing with their wind ensemble, which is funny. But again, it's a challenge. I knew nothing about medieval music. Don't really care that much about it, but I read them for an entire summer of months. It's just about medieval music, and I don't regret it, because it's all about learning how to learn, and it's a really valuable thing. So I think that's the thing that students can know and appreciate too. Is sometimes it's just knowing how to know things, how to learn, and how to be your own teacher later in life, and that's the greatest lesson that you can get out of school.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed on your profile page on WVU that you performed in the U.S. and around the world. Could you tell us about one of the most interesting performance events, or one that meant a lot to you as a jazz musician?
Well, yeah, I think one that sticks out wasn't that long ago. It was only beginning of 2018. I was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and we actually have a pretty big WVU presence in Kuala Lumpur.
Wow.
It's kind of hard to believe, but yeah, there's a big university, UCSI it's called, and their dean went to WVU, and he was one of my teachers here, which is kind of cool. But the reason it was meaningful is because the musicians play at such a high level, and people around the world play at such a high level. But it was really, really special. You get on an airplane and you travel. I think that flight was probably 28 hours, and to get there and to have an audience that was so appreciative. Sometimes here I wonder if our audience really appreciates enough to really stop and turn the phones off and really pay attention to what's happening with the music. It was just such a really special audience. Like, we played maybe a 3-hour concert, nobody left, and they were there with us the whole time. Yeah, it was amazing.
Fantastic. Well, I know even at your level, I'm sure you still practice a lot. Are there certain techniques that you use to motivate yourself, like and perfecting your skills in your personal practice sessions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Unfortunately, fear is a great motivator, even for those of us who are later in our careers. But right now with the pandemic, I don't have the fear of performance. Like, I don't have to go to some place, whether it's Morgantown Brewing Company or Pittsburgh or DC or wherever. It's created a different set of circumstances. Like, a really great way to get things done is to have a deadline. And for students, you say, well, the deadline is everybody's playing a recital. Everybody's got to have a piece ready for such and such date. Now we don't have that. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give myself a rotation of things to practice. So I'm playing a lot of piano right now. I'm doing a whole lot of transcribing. Been been doing arrangements and doing some overdubs, and I'll throw a lot of that stuff on the internet just because it keeps me going. And so um, a lot of it right now is recording, doing a whole lot of recording from home. And
Yeah.
the cool thing, for a bunch of people, we're in West Virginia, and there's this conception that you have to be in a big city or something like that. Well, now all the people in the big city have as many gigs as we have, so we're all really kind of playing an equal game, and so now is a really good time to write music and compose and and record. So that's what's keeping me going.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Well, some students we have in music and they leave for sports because they're looking for a path to scholarship to go to college. Are there any scholarship opportunities for music?
We have a whole lot. I've taught at several different places, and what we have at WVU is pretty sizable. And I'm not sure if a lot of the faculty have that kind of vantage point that I have, but um, yeah, I would say that it's very possible. And another piece of advice that I would have to students is, keep the bills low. Um, we have some students here that get into Eastman. Eastman is going to be the first school that costs $100,000 a year to go to,
Oh
but we
my.
get students that get into Eastman. Why would anybody pay that kind of money? Um, it's all the same core curriculum, and you have the same number of hours in the day to practice. So we're starting to get students, and maybe I was one as well as a young person of age 17, 18. You come here because it makes sense. You can get a
Yeah.
solid education. Even without funding, it's a pretty low level. um, the other key to funding is that promise, and I think a lot of students that we have are get the promise scholarship, and that puts a huge dent in the cost.
Yeah.
And Mr. Hill and I are of an age that the GPA might not have mattered as much. It matters even more now.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I have to say, talking to students and parents, is the GPA really matters a whole lot, even for music, because that promise is going to put things well within reach, and then a really solid music audition is going to be a possibility of being able to really make a significant dent in the cost. And then of course that means you come out of college with not as many loans, then it really takes the pressure off. As a matter of
Right.
fact, I should say I met Gordon Gee. I see Gordon Gee around. He's our president of the university, and one day he shook my hand and he said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "This is the greatest day that I've had in my career." I called 7 students to give them full scholarships. I told
Oh
him,
wow.
this is President Gee. He was in the New York Times yesterday. He's kind of a superstar. I told him, what I appreciate is being able to work at a university where the arts matter, and the funding is such that we allow for students to have careers. Sometimes it is possible to spend so much on a college education that it takes it makes a career much harder. But
Yes.
it's easier to have a career at a university like this that has that possibility of funding.
Yeah. Man. Well, that's really encouraging. There's a lot of good things you said there. I think that's going to inspire a lot of people to
That's
try for
great.
that. At Dream Big, we have some students that are interested in music as a career. And, as middle school and high schoolers, what do you think they should be working on now to prepare for college and careers in music? And also, was there anything that you feel like someone maybe if they'd have told you at that age this thing, you'd have been more successful?
Well, I think one thing that's really important for the students to know is, often bands have competitions, and there's competitions for this and that. You're as a student, you're in competition with yourself, and so the metronome is your gauge. When you play your scales, you want to play your scales every day,
Yeah.
and the metronome needs to creep forward a little faster every day. something that I just talked to my wife about. She's a professional poet, which is even harder than music. You think
Oh,
music's
wow.
hard, be a poet. It's much harder. And those pieces of art behind me, those are from my grandmother. She had a tough career. It's hard
Oh,
to sell artwork. It's a lot easier to play an instrument.
yeah.
Um, but one of the conversations we have is, as a musician, you just kind of have to pull out the instrument every day and kind of play it all the time, especially brass, because brass is unforgiving.
Yes.
But I think that's one of the best pieces of advice. Have a really open mind. Like, don't put yourself in a box to say I'm a classical musician, I don't play jazz. Or the other side is, if you play jazz, jazz is awesome. We know that.
Yeah.
But you also have to have the ability to do other things, to be able to connect with other musicians and be marketable. And it also adds a depth to the music that you're creating, if you're able to empathize with what it's like to be a cello player playing Baroque music, for instance. So advice for students, yeah, really, try to be better than yourself every time you put up the instrument. Try to set some short-term goals that
Mhm.
you can achieve, learning pieces. If you're a brass player, range, climbing in the range, for instance. But also, don't compare yourself to other people, because there's always going to be somebody that's really amazing. And
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really tough thing, especially when you open the internet and you see 7-year-olds playing, John Coltrane's giant steps. It's really easy to be discouraged.
Right.
So you kind of keep that in mind and play by ear and listen to a lot of music, lots and lots of music.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. At Dream Big, we've been starting to study jazz, and could you speak a little bit to the importance of knowing the history of jazz?
Yeah, uh, yeah, it's really, really important. Um, to really understand the music, you have to kind of understand the people that made the music. It's really, you could study the history of the United States with jazz music, or even the blues and some of the other peripheral music. In other words, we're thinking of jazz as a phenomenon that started with, the settling and the colonization of this country, and the African drums came in on the slave ships, and we really can't take that out of jazz. Like, it's so much a part of the music. um, you could study civil rights based on jazz. As people in this country started to accept jazz music, they also accepted the people that were making the music. So that's a really, really, really heavy concept. But you can't take jazz and put it in the classroom and disconnect it from civil rights, Black Lives Matter, um, all of the egregious things that happen in Latin America
Yeah.
in the colonization. Jazz is all of these things put together, and the blues is an amazing example. The blues is a part of jazz, and it's this bittersweet phenomenon of beauty and sorrow all put together. And I would really say that it's a really tough thing to talk to students about,
Yeah.
because sometimes students feel as though they're being blamed, but we just have to accept what things are for what they are. This is what happened in our country, and we have to figure out a way to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, what are music students expected to know before they enter college if they were going to continue with music?
Yeah, well, I'm a terrible example because I play a lot of instruments. The best thing that your students need to do is they need to have one instrument that they play really well.
Okay.
Sometimes we get students in, and that said, there is a degree for students to play a lot of different instruments. That would be music industry or music therapy, which are great degrees. Um, Open mind, listening to a lot of music is really important. But really, for the students that really want to be players, you have to have a level of proficiency on one instrument, and it would be really, really helpful. And basically, if you want to make it really, really simple, there's two things we do in music: we play beautiful melodies, or we play things that are fast. It's really that. And that's kind of like a horn player thing to say, but it applies to piano, applies to bass, applies to drums. So I don't know if that's a adequate answer to your question, but any student that wants to be a music student should probably know a little bit of piano too, like get around it on a keyboard,
Yeah.
be able to play by ear.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember being shocked by the needing to know piano when I got to college as well. Like, I play my horn, and boy, you gotta learn piano too. So, yeah. Um, what happens at an audition, and how do you prepare for that?
Well, a lot of students are going to get nervous, and the way you alleviate nerves are a couple of things. One, you prepare a whole lot, and that means playing your instrument every day and having the pieces under your fingers and in the ear are more important than the fingers. You really have to know these pieces. The other thing would be make sure a lot of the students are going to apply to several schools, and each school might ask for a slightly different thing. So what I've seen my students do is they create a spreadsheet and say, school X needs these things, school Y needs these things. Sometimes there's some overlap, but what you don't want to do is get to the audition and have the person who's given the audition say, hey, can you play this thing for me? And you say, oh my God, I had no idea that was going to happen. So that's a really, really important thing to be ready for. What you should expect in an audition is you have to think that you're also auditioning the school, which means a lot of students are going to be good enough to get into 5 of the 5 music schools they applied to. But what you're looking for is a level of comfort in the environment and also with the private instructors. So it's really, really helpful to, when you go to an audition, to play the best that you can, and to have maybe some questions about the program and the teachers that you would study with. Because if you feel as though you're uncomfortable with the teacher, you're not going to want to go to the school.
Yeah.
And and I say this because I'm pretty excited about a lot of our new faculty. We have a lot of new faculty, and they're really, really great, good human beings that I think students will want to be in a room with for an hour a week.
Yeah.
But I think that's really helpful. So again, to alleviate the nerves, be ready, know everything that's going to happen, but also, sometimes you have to seek out opportunities to play in front of people, just so you're not only playing solo like once a year. Play for your family, play for your church, play for the neighbors, play on your front porch. Find opportunities to make yourself nervous, because the more you do that, the less nervous you'll be in the long run. So I know nerves are a thing. It's a thing to conquer.
Absolutely. Other than teaching, what types of music programs are available to someone that's wanting to make music their occupation at WVU, and what can they do there to help you reach those kind of goals?
Well, the first thing that I would mention that doesn't actually talk to your question, but I think it's really important, is we're looking for new programs. One of the newest programs is a pre-med/music. And that one's really important to me because I was in a high school. I heard one of the most amazing trumpet players, and he said, I got to stop playing music because I'm going to be a doctor. That's a problem. We want more doctors that know how to play music. So we have that degree program. Now that's obviously going to be somebody who uses music as kind of more of the peripheral in a career as a doctor or a dentist or whatever. In terms of music careers, it used to be just performance and education, and then it became classical performance and jazz performance and education. We still have those, and they're really great, but now the 2 other really hot programs are music therapy, which basically it gears people up to work in the healthcare field. I've seen it in my own life, playing for a grandparent. You play some 1940 songs and people just wake up and conversations start to happen. Music brings amazing things out of people who could barely remember how to talk.
Yeah.
they'll remember song lyrics, and then all of a sudden you have these great conversations. So music therapy is a beautiful thing. And then music industry, which is a really entrepreneurial field, it's basically a business degree, but with music as a part of it. So studying like copyrights and also knowing how to operate in a recording studio, do live sound, and so forth. So music industry is incredibly hot at this school right now, as is music therapy. Now that said, some of my greatest jazz musicians in my program are therapy and music and music industry, and all these other programs. Not all of my jazz students are jazz studies majors.
Right. Well, is one of the questions we had here is from a student wants to know what your favorite pizza topping is.
Oh, it's got to be it's got to be pepperoni.
Yeah, nice. Um, you know, this is from some parents here of the students we have, and their question here is that many of the high school students in West Virginia don't have access to the high quality music programs in their schools, and they're lucky, a band class is available, but often uh, not. They don't offer enrichment and upper level teaching. Many times the class is taught below their ability level, and at the same time, other students have the opportunity to attend schools of the arts and have extensive music programs in their schools. So how can you suggest that in West Virginia we begin to broaden this gap? If they want to pursue a post-secondary education in music, and how can they be competitive with their peers that had the better experience?
Yeah, and that's something I take into account all the time. I was in the Boston area for a long time, and some of those students had 3 and 4 lessons a week. But it's not impossible to be able to come out of a situation like what we have here. What you can do, the internet opens up everything.
Yeah.
There's a lot of online. There's a lot of online resources. There are summer camps. Everything that I do as an offering for the jazz program in the School of Music, I'm often getting funded from the West Virginia Wine and Jazz Festival, and part of what I'm doing with that is making it open to the public. If you can't make it to Morgantown, I'm live streaming everything on our Facebook page. So again, the internet kind of connects in that way. So I've had master classes with like legendary Matt Wilson. He was on the front cover of Modern Drummer a couple of years ago. We had Rufus Reed. Oh, there's so many of them, and that's one thing I'm really excited about. I've been able to bring a lot of these musicians here. Now, once again, it's not Wellsburg, but a lot of this stuff is going to be available online. Even I was in South America, and somebody asked me, how do you find jazz music? I said, well, you go on, there's a club in New York called Smalls, and you can check out their live feed. And that was in Ecuador, which is even in the same time zone as New York City. So, I said that to them. It's possible, but you just have to seek it out. No, I think what a lot of students are going to have the issue with. When I was a kid, I would have to drive an hour to get one CD.
Well, yeah.
You drive an hour, a half hour to the store and a half hour back, and the only thing you could get was whatever they might have in the store.
Right.
The students that we have today have a different set of circumstances. You've got too much information. You got all of YouTube, and that's a rabbit hole you can go down and get really stuck in.
Mm-hmm.
But now Spotify, if you have a Spotify, you can get into so many records. Now students are just kind of, there's too much information. So now it's that's kind of the information that's the thing that's difficult. But when you're talking about not being challenged in school, yeah, it's a tough thing, and it's gonna make a lot of your students say, well, I'm a clarinet player, but maybe I should play trombone in the band.
Right.
Which is really, really tough. Summer programs right now, there's a percussion camp at the WVU that's happening. Okay. I don't know what the fee was to get in. I have a jazz camp that's happening this summer, jazz camp in Newport. So that's an opportunity. So a lot of this is stuff you want to seek out. master classes online.
Yeah.
You know, I get it. It's tough. It's
Yeah.
really tough. But on the other hand, like I say, the other difficulty is having too much information. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of your students would say, really, I have too much information. Yeah, you got too much information.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to narrow it down. Look at Miles Davis's 50-year career. Where in the world do you start with that? Because you have it all at your fingertips.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. And by the way, we have your Newport Jazz Camp listed on our Facebook page at Dream Big. So if
Awesome.
any of the students are interested in attending that, get more info there. If a student's considering applying for a music program, and you kind of touched on this earlier, but it has a little extra in this. Want to know what types of things they should be comfortable with, and what should they have ready, like far as like repertoire or scales or sight reading, and then should they have video submissions ready? Do they need a resume? Those kind of things.
Sometimes students submit a resume. Sometimes students audition by video. Like I have somebody that contacted me from Florida, and I said, well, maybe a video is a good idea. People from other countries, they'll send videos. A lot of the time, though, if you're from a couple hours away, it makes sense to come on an audition day.
Yeah.
It makes a better impression. I should tell a lot of your students too. If they're really serious about going to school, it's possible and a really good idea to contact our faculty directly. Like we have a brand new trombone teacher, and you could contact him. His name is Mr. Bilal, and you say, hey, can we meet on Skype or whatever? Or now everybody's doing Zoom. And, it puts yourself in a really good position to know these teachers. We got a new saxophone teacher. I play the saxophone, but we actually have a saxophone teacher who's really, really fantastic. I mean, he's great, and he's teaching a lot of online lessons. So that's another thing that you have at your disposal. The West Virginia University, we've got a lot of faculty that are full time that are really, really trying to reach out, and of course, we want the best students to come here, but we also are really trying to serve the community, which is really, really important.
Yeah.
But in terms of my audition requirements, I look through it, and each instrument is slightly different. Like drums are kind of their own thing, guitar is kind of its own thing. But in general, what you want to do is you want to have at least two pieces that are going to display a really good sound and lyricism, or something that's kind of more fast and demonstrates proficiency on the instrument in that regard. And that's really, really helpful. And I always tell my students, don't mess up the F major scale, because that's your gimme. You want to be able to play the things that you should be able to play.
Right. Exactly. Well, you talked about scholarships before, and a lot about the Promise Scholarship. Specifically, what music scholarships are available, and what's expected of the candidate to be awarded a music scholarship?
Have a really good audition. Another thing is, get in touch with the music faculty. Like if you're a saxophone player, you can certainly get in touch with me, but it would also be helpful to get in touch with Professor Siegfried. Piano, get in touch with the piano faculty. Demonstrate to these teachers what you're doing now in 10th, 11th, or even 12th grade. And then the other thing that will put you in a good position is if you take advice from these teachers and you actually practice it, then you come back. Like my biggest success story is the student that's getting his doctorate here. He stayed with me in Rhode Island as well. I saw him in October of his senior year. I didn't think he was a really strong saxophone player. Gave him some things to practice. He came back in February, and he'd actually done all of the things. And that meant more than his ability level in some regards. It was to actually take that advice and to really, really use it.
Yeah.
And he's become one of my biggest success stories. I mean, he's a fantastic saxophone player. He just won the concerto competition last year and played with the orchestra here. Yeah. He's played in my big bands. He's a great saxophone player. And so now I've known him for quite a bunch of years now, because he's, he must be 30 years old or whatever. But that makes a really, really big impression. Once again, though, the GPA really is helpful. If you can come in with a 3.7, 3.8, or even I got an incoming freshman that's got a 4.3.
Wow.
Those things really, really help.
Yeah.
But then just have a really strong audition, and that
Yeah.
connect with the instrument. Sometimes we talk about what's good music, just connecting with the instrument.
Yeah. Well, what about what if any education opportunities does WVU provide for middle school and high school students to participate in?
Well, one of the big things that comes to mind for me, because I direct the jazz program, is we have a honor jazz group. Normally, it's been one. This year there were two, and of course we get canceled by the pandemic,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But I'm really, really trying to put an emphasis on that. Of course, we have a honor choir, orchestra, band. Those are big events. I think on the jazz side of things, it might be harder to audition and be placed. But as I keep adding bands, it adds the opportunities. But I would really strongly encourage the students to take us up on that. We
Okay.
have a new thing called the Creativity Academy. It's been kind of hampered by the pandemic, but it's basically a matinee series in which we're not just playing concerts, we're kind of also explaining the music. And I try to stream everything, to go
Mhm.
back to the internet, just so people who are not in Morgantown can feel somewhat connected. And it's really, really helpful. Then of course, yeah, the summer camps. Um, Randomly there's like a cello day, there's a viola day,
Mhm.
and you can kind of stay tuned for those things, and that's a really great thing. What we're really trying to do here at this school is have a community. So you come here to study with the professors, but it's also the students are really great,
Oh,
and
that's
there's something to be said for that too.
yeah, absolutely. You know, um, is it possible for WVU to provide like a mentorship program where college students work with young musicians throughout the state with activities like lessons or seminars, guidance, or camps, jam sessions, or tours?
We experimented with that a couple of years ago. I don't know where that stands. We had a good friend of mine teaches in Tucker County, which is pretty long distance from where
Yeah.
you're located, but it's over on the other side of Elkins. Um, internet connectivity was a bit of an issue, but we went for it. To be honest with you, when the pandemic hit us, the first thing I thought of was trying to do this. But then what actually stopped me is the fact that I did not want to send my students out and give free lessons and take away from people who are actually trying to make money teaching lessons.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that makes sense, but I know a great number of people who are teaching online, in all areas, in all countries, and I was actually afraid to go up against that, and so I'm really, it puts me in a bad position because I do want us to serve the community, but I also want to not be in competition with the musicians that are trying to be freelancing.
Yeah.
And I do like the idea. I need to check in on it because I think it's a great question. It
Yeah.
was something that we were doing, especially for drum set guitar, because the traditional band program leaves out guitar, piano, drum set, and bass.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sympathetic to that as well with freelance musicians. And we do give out we do free lessons, but the kids do a contract with us that they agree to fundraise and help support their cause. And these are mostly kids that wouldn't get lessons otherwise. So you're not really taken away from a teacher from a kid that couldn't show up. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the community's really warmed up to us here, so they don't feel that we're competition or taking money away. So we're mostly funded by grants and fundraising.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah. um let's see, in terms of being prepared for the post-secondary music education, what key areas of instruction, where should they focus, like theory or sight reading, or is there certain things maybe they should practice that maybe you see students coming in that are a little lacking?
Well, sight reading is something that's come up a couple times. I think one way to look at sight reading is to isolate the rhythms, know how to read the rhythms off the page, and be able to count them. One thing I had a teacher who had us do is we'd clap along 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and really do the subdivisions, especially with the 16th notes. So if you have
Yeah.
a bar of 4, don't think of it as 4 beats. Sometimes you want to think of it as 8 beats, like eighth notes, or a 16th subdivision, which is 16. So like if I play a Latin gig with some really, really fantastic Latin musicians, some of those bars of 4 are really 16, because I could play I could play all the right notes, but if I'm messing up the 16th, then it might as well be wrong.
Right.
So, I would spend a lot of time with sight reading if it's an issue, but it's just conceptualizing by being able to count and being able to count in 3, being able to play something that's in 7, 8. Give yourself etudes. Find things online. imslp.org is just tons of sheet music that's open to download.
Okay.
Everything you might possibly want that's ancient classical music and some even modern music. So it's a good resource for finding things to play. I've mentioned piano, really, really helpful. Piano will give you a knowledge of theory, especially if you're reading chord symbols.
Yeah.
It could be really, really helpful. Being able to just find major and minor triads on the piano would be a really tremendous help. If you're a treble clef player, learn some bass clef. If you're a bass clef, learn the treble clef.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are things online. Back to online, we can find things online that are really, really helpful tools, and probably apps as well. A friend of mine who's now in Germany did a rhythm app. No, sorry, he's in Italy. He's a classmate of mine. He's from Michigan originally, but now he lives in Italy. So, there's apps, there's things to find.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, what kind of what help does WVU offer in terms of job placement for music students?
I think it's a really, really good thing for your students to know. There's 100% placement for music ed. So if a student goes through this program, but the other part of it is you got to be willing to go where the job is. And I just worked with a student. He turned down 2 or 3 jobs and then took one, and he's going to the Eastern Panhandle.
Okay.
There are, if you want a job, you do music ed or music therapy, also 100% placement. But those are for students who, your parents are really worried about any prospect of a career. 100% placement, and you can't beat it. I know that this is going to happen because it happened last year. Sometime in August, somebody's going to contact me and say, "Don't you have a student that can take this job?" I'm going to say, "No, our students already have jobs." I'm not the music ed person. I'm the jazz guy, and they're contacting me just because I have a lot of friends in the WVU network. But that said, it's a really entrepreneurial. It's an entrepreneurial world, and I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to open our students up to being able to do a whole lot of things. Like I work for WVU, but I just also did a commercial for a Japanese television, doing recordings for various projects. And so my income doesn't exist just as coming from a school.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of band directors that I know, they're going to teach lessons and play gigs on the weekends. So we call it a portfolio career. And this is actually something I wish somebody would have told me as a student.
Okay.
You make $20 here, you make $20 here, you make $20 here. You put all that together, it can be a real serious income. I bought a car, and half of that car was cash. And it was from gigs and private lessons. I went into the car dealer with a stack of $20 bills.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I know that when I was in college, music and medicine had the highest attrition rate. I don't know if it's still the same experience now, but what would you say is the number one trap? What when someone's not successful in the music programs, what do you think happens? Why is that?
Well, you know, it's tough. There are a lot of people that tell us that we can't do it, and I think that's really really tough. A lot of guidance counselors are going to tell you not to go down a music path, but the reality is, if you become a lawyer, you're also going to work 70 hours a week.
Yeah.
There's no easy path. I tell my students this. I was in New Orleans, and a woman who went to the school, alum of WVU, is living down there, and that's what she told me. She said, my husband's a lawyer and he works for 70 hours. So tell your students, if they're looking for an easier way out, it's definitely not law school. And doctors work really hard too. Doctors, they have to pass boards every couple of years. So
Yeah.
there's no easy way out. But what music gives you is, it gives you the ability to leave something in the world that is beyond words,
Yeah. Absolutely.
But in terms of a trap, you also have to be really good at talking to people, answering your emails, answering your text messages, just being responsive. You have to be assertive, but not assertive to the point where you're upsetting people. So one of the most valuable skills in music is to be able to take criticism, which is really, really hard,
Mm-hmm.
but also to be able to work with other students and be able to give them criticism in a way that they know that you still love them as a person, but you just want to fix something in the music. And I see that as being a pitfall. A lot of students really have trouble with taking criticism or being able to give criticism and just working well with others.
Right.
And that's a really, really important skill for a musician. And then the other, frankly, is time management, because you go to college for anything,
Mm-hmm.
nobody's going to make you go to class.
Right.
You need to go to class.
Yeah.
Sometimes just showing up to class, but you also have to be able to take an assignment that's due in 3 weeks and not put it off to the night before. So I tell all my students, get some kind of a planner. So a week before the assignment's due, give yourself a notice. Hey, I have to work on this paper. Otherwise, you'll be staying up all night and then getting a D on the paper.
Absolutely.
So time management is really, really important.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I had heard you speak. You were so gracious. Let me sit in on your class, and on Zoom, and I heard you say that networking was very important to your success. Can you give it some examples of ways that you can start networking, and how do you maintain it? Like, how do you build up your network?
Yeah, well, one of the ways that I've met a lot of people is not living in one place. I've lived in a lot of places and traveled and met a whole lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
We had a trumpet teacher here that said the same thing. Like, somebody that he'd met 10 years beforehand remembered him for an opportunity for something. Like the thing that I just did for the Japanese television commercial was with somebody that he's a piano player in a wedding band that I played in probably 7 years ago. And I think some of it is be accessible. Don't change your phone number.
Yeah.
keep the same phone number. Having some kind of a web presence is really important. It used to be about websites, but now it's more social media. That's
Mm-hmm.
really helpful. It's helpful to have a lot of friends. One time I had lunch with a really famous saxophone player named Joe Lovano. And Joe Lovano, I asked him for career advice. He said, just be cool, have a lot of friends. And so there's something to be said for that. It's really easy to get caught up in how competitive things can be in terms of money or playing and say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful. And surround yourself by all the best players.
Yeah.
That helps too.
Yeah.
If your name comes up beside other people who happen to be really, really good, that's really that's really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I have this last question here for you. What guidance could you offer students trying to determine if their abilities could lead to a possible lifelong occupation, or is it better suited as a hobby? What?
Well, yeah, the first thing that came to mind is I thought, sometimes the teacher will tell you that, but I
Yeah.
don't want to leave it all on the teacher. I mean, realistically, we're looking for this kind of intangible quality of just having a really good ear. Like one of the first things, and this will apply for drummers too, because drummers and musicians too.
Yeah.
Somebody hits a note on the piano, you don't know what it is. Can you sing that note back?
Hmm.
That's a really, really important thing. Not only can you sing that note back, but then can you take your flute or your saxophone or your clarinet or whatever or trumpet and play that note? Can you find it?
Yeah.
And that's a pretty good determining quality of whether somebody really has that innate ability. Also, just being able to clap a rhythm back, a couple bars of four, something to be able to hear it and reproduce it. Those are really big determining things, and that's kind of a giveaway. That's something I do in my auditions.
Okay.
That that I because truthfully, a lot of musicians come in with a disadvantage, and I didn't have any advantage. My first saxophone lessons were at WVU, so I had a handful beforehand, but
Yeah.
I know what it's like, and I think it probably be somewhat meaningful to your students to know that I'm directing this program. And when I showed up at this school, I really couldn't play jazz. I couldn't swing. I didn't know the theory behind it, and these are skills that you acquire in school. So when I was at the age of your students, I was dying to go to school so I could finally learn the stuff that I wanted to learn. And
Right.
so it's pretty exciting. So my goal is to just make it so when students get to that music building in the fall that they feel the same thing that I felt. And it was like, oh man, something really heavy is about to go down here. It's really
Absolutely.
exciting.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Well, I really appreciate your time and sharing all this with us. We're really grateful.
Well, yeah, thank you, and I really appreciate what you're doing, and I've kind of checked out what's happening with the students in the program, and I wish there were more things like that happening, throughout all of West Virginia. It's really, really outstanding, and I really, really appreciate seeing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. All right. Well, this was Jared Sims of WVU, and you can check him out on his website or online at social media or on the WVU page.